Good afternoon, and welcome to the Cablecast post-agenda meeting regarding RCOs in the city of Pittsburgh. And we are joined today by Councilman Lavelle, Councilwoman Strasburger, Councilwoman Warwick, and is anyone online? Any members online? I can't see that writing. So, okay, I don't think there's anybody online. But we may be joined by other members as we go along. And I'm going to turn it over first. Director, let's everyone identify themselves, and then we'll turn it over to you for a brief presentation.
Thank you.
And then we'll have Marimba from, follow up with her. We'll just go after her. Okay. Director.
My name is Karen Abrams. I'm the Director of City Planning.
Good afternoon. I'm Sharonda Watley. I'm Assistant Director of Strategic Planning for DCP.
Hello, I'm Stephanie Joy Everett. I'm a Principal Planner in the Department of City Planning.
Hi, I'm Marimba Malyans, President and CEO of the Hill Community Development Corporation and also member of Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group.
I'll forgive you for that. Director, you want to say a few words?
Yes, so I did want to do a quick presentation on just providing some data and some information about the RCO, Registered Community Organization, and Development Activities Meeting programs of the department. So I'll share my screen.
There it goes.
Is it? Oh, you have? Okay, here we go. Okay. Okay, so we want to just define what the Registered Community Organization, also known as RCO program, is. Community organizations that are concerned with the development of the community can become a Registered Community Organization, or RCO. These organizations have a formal role in neighborhood planning and development activities. Registered community organizations have proven that they are a transparent and inclusive organization that has a communication strategy and clear methods of reporting. And so this is a map of our RCOs. There are 39 RCOs that cover 45 neighborhoods in the city of Pittsburgh. And as you can see, the program has grown tremendously over the last several years. Since 2018, we've been tracking this. And roughly 200 hours are spent by the staff doing certifications, renewals, training, et cetera, answering questions. And there are approximately 500 hours in 2022 responding to RCO inquiries and questions. This is just in 1 year. And then we'll get to the development activities meetings, also known as DAMs.
I say it all the time.
A development activities meeting is required between an applicant and the applicable RCOs for any development activity that requires a public hearing. The purpose is to give residents, property owners, business owners, and stakeholders an opportunity to learn about the proposals that affect them and to resolve concerns at an early stage of the application process. So below are just the requirements, what kind of prompts a dam. Not every single development in a community will prompt a dam, but these are just some of the ways that dams are prompted. I will not go through all of them, but these are some of the ways. And this is a number of dams that we have done over the last couple of years. We did about 450 hours worth of administration of 80 dams in 2022. Thank you, Councilman. And we're looking, and it's obviously increased tremendously over the years. And will continue to increase over time as we get more RCOs and more development projects. And I'm trying to get this slide. Okay. And this is just a graph of some of the largest amount of dams in our neighborhoods. Downtown Oakland, Southside, Hill District, and Uptown, and Squirrel Hill. Many of these dams, many of these RCOs are overlapping. And this accounts for 35% of our dams. So there's a lot of time with and we have to actually facilitate the dams when they're overlapping RCOs in a geographic area. So oftentimes if there's more than one RCO, we're oftentimes administering the dams. And these are the actual neighborhoods and districts where there are overlapping development activities meetings.
Could you send that to all of us?
Yes, we will definitely send this to all of you. And just to give you an idea as to what the city staff does, particularly DCP does, as far as preparing for a dam and administering it and what happens afterwards. So we provide ADA accommodations, website updates, upcoming meetings are posted online in advance of the development activities meeting. Usually when there's an overlapping RCO situation, we create flyers and advertise those meetings with the agenda. We coordinate with the applicant, RCOs, our planning staff, and others who may be important to the process. And we host and moderate the dams, often when there are multiple RCOs in a neighborhood. They can last anywhere from 1 hour to 4 hours. And then finally, the staff posts reports online following each meeting. And I did want to actually mention that we actually have a survey out that we put out. I think the survey is online right now on our Engage page. To get some feedback from residents, developers, city councilors, and others who were interested in providing feedback about this process and their experiences with it. So we're very interested in learning what people's experiences are so we can hopefully make the process easier on residents and stakeholders. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone in your staff have anything else they want to add? No? Marimba, do you have a few things you want to add? And
Sure.
let me just say first, thank you for coming at last minute, because I was talking to Ricky Moody today and mentioned this meeting, and I'm glad that you're here, so thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Councilwoman. We, in the Hill District, as you could see from the graph that Director Abrams shared, have quite a few registered community organizations in the Hill District neighborhood. The Hill CDC, for context, for those of you who may not be familiar, is an organization that's 35 years old. We have long done the work of community development, advocating on behalf of the community, issues particularly related to our master plan and community plans and visions. And we are very much committed to the implementation of our community master plan as well. When the Registered Community Organization ordinance was adopted, you may recall that there was not a lot of interaction or public testimony specifically around the ordinance. And I think that as a result, while aspirationally ideal, there are some opportunities that we may be missing as a city with the intent and spirit of the RCO ordinance. I particularly want to lift up that City Council, according to the ordinance, was striving to improve community voice, was striving to ensure that communities could be heard by developers such that they could respond in meaningful ways, and that one of the goals was certainly to achieve more equitable outcomes in our city relative to development. And so for neighborhoods like the Hill District, where we have had a long-standing process called the Development Review Panel, which brought together community, Hill District community organizations from throughout the entire neighborhood, where a resident is appointed on behalf of those organizations, and this includes children-serving organizations, nonprofit organizations, churches, and so forth. It is intended to be a broad roundtable, and residents are appointed to review development, and then each and every resident in the community has an opportunity to vote. So that process is now over 4 years old, so it's a little older than the Registered Community Organization ordinance. So what happened for us in the Hill District was, in some ways, the ordinance lowered the bar of community engagement, because it created other organizations that otherwise may have just been more inclined to join the existing roundtable, right? And so while the ordinance does legally require developers to engage community, that's new, that's good, and that's important. It, in some ways, whenever there's an overlapping boundary, which can be done with a letter from the council person and an approval from city planning, can increase the number of voices, but it can also reduce community power and unity. And so I think that those things should be considered as we hear from other communities. And I hope that this is not the only opportunity to talk about this ordinance and the impacts that it's having in our city and in our neighborhoods in particular. So I don't know how far you want to go into the detail of the ordinance, but my hope is that we can more effectively follow some of the stated goals, which is to not create overlapping boundaries in neighborhoods. Now, if anyone does the research, you'll find that I was concerned about the RCO ordinance from the very beginning because I thought that it would cause potential division in neighborhoods that were already well organized and had a natural ecosystem. Because the thing is, if you give people a label, that it means something all of a sudden, right? Mm-hmm. And so, so sometimes that has negative impacts unnecessarily. And in our case, it removed the development activities meeting from the roundtable and the longstanding group that had been administering them and put it in the hands of community of city planning, an organization and agency within the city that's already strapped for resources and bandwidth, right? So now they're having to administer our neighborhood's development meetings when really that should be conducted for the community and by the community. And so those are some of the things, but I would say that the overlapping boundary piece is really something that I think City Council needs to think differently about. I personally did not think that a letter from the council person should have been required. However, I know that that was important to City Council at the time. We had some concerns about whether or not the metrics by which organizations had to meet would exclude voices from community processes. We still have some of those concerns as well. And then, of course, it is 100% confusing, and this is perhaps my greatest concern, is what is the value of an RCO and an RCO's voice if it is ignored at the decision-making table within commissions and parties, most especially at city planning, right? And so we have found that even with RCO status, we can bring our processes, we can bring documented communications, you know, and the decision may still not be in favor of the community, or there may not be a requirement for that developer to go back and have a dialogue with the community. And I think that that flies in the face of the intent and spirit and the letter of the RCO ordinance. And I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you. I'm so glad you came. I'll turn it over to members first for questions, and I have a lot of questions myself. Any members have any questions? Comments? Councilwoman Strasburger?
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you all for your participation today and all that you do to chart the future of the city. And what I'm struggling with and have for a while with a lot of citywide programs, and RCOs are not excluded from that, is to balance the need for the desire for, say, consistency or sort of standards across the board. I mean, that goes for everything from residential permit parking to RCOs, right? It's like this balance between consistency and standards and flexibility for different neighborhoods and different neighborhood needs. Because what I'm hearing in the Hill District and probably others is that the standards were higher, and this lowered the standards, and this also brought in other voices. And I see that there are other probably the well-represented organizations that made it onto the pie chart could potentially have a different way of, maybe not utilizing DCP staff in the same way. Could they be deputized to run a development activities meeting in a way that is meets the same standards of a DAM meeting, but is a little bit. It doesn't require the same level of staff. Maybe DCP staff attends but doesn't have to run it, or doesn't have to do the prep work. But also, that doesn't necessarily get at all of the issues. It maybe gets to the staffing issue, but there's also the question of, can there be is there the possibility of flexibility built into either the meeting itself or the process? I'm not sure what the answer is, but I wanted to just voice it. Then lastly, on the flip side, I represent some communities like Shadyside that does not have an RCO, and the only opportunity there is for hosting what is a really badly needed kind of development activities types of meetings is for our office to run them, or our office to run them in concert with maybe an understaffed or underrepresented community organization that isn't an RCO, and that's not sustainable either, right? I would love to have the ability to have the professionalized, well-run development activities meetings in a place like Shadyside, where we haven't had that opportunity. When I go into Squirrel Hill, I think, oh, if we only had this in Shadyside. So I can see the need for it in some neighborhoods, and I can also see where it's not helpful in others. So I'll stop there. I think I've made my point. I don't know what the solution is. I would be interested in any thoughts that you've already discussed or you've already been in dialogue about on this topic, because I'm sure I have very limited scope in terms of my experience and what I'm seeing, much less than you all do. So, if there's any response now, I'm happy to hear it, and if not, I'm happy to talk further. Okay.
Councilwoman?
Yeah. So I would definitely be remiss if I did not sort of start by saying that in the communities that I represent, and this across the board, from Squirrel Hill to Greenfield to Hazelwood, the presence of RCOs has, like you said, sort of created divisions and mistrust with other people in the communities, resentment of the RCO, and that is across the board in every neighborhood. Justified or unjustified, that is the feeling, right? So this is, and I'm not saying everybody feels that way, but once the status is there and that connection with that sort of exclusive, like that exclusivity is there, then you get into issues of, well, who gets on the board of the RCO, and how are those board members elected, and who should run. And I've seen in multiple cases where fighting with the like out and out, where you're getting break off organizations, and so now you've got two organizations, and which I personally am not. I always feel like we're stronger together, right? So, but and I'm always trying to encourage folks to, run for the board, join. If it is an RCO situation, right? Run for the board, join the board. Everybody work together. But ultimately, yeah, I have seen that, and I've also have to say that I have seen on the developer side, and again, I won't get into specifics, naming names, but I have been in conversations with developers who have had a very small meeting that is not represented, just because it happens to be on that night, that just happens to be whatever, or maybe there was something else going on or whatever, but it just happened, and saying, well, and I say, and I'll tell you, well, you need to make sure that you talk to the whole community. And the developer, who is an external developer, has said, but we did talk to the community. We had a meeting with RCOX, right? And so it's almost like a box checked on the developer's part because they met with this. So I do understand the purpose for creating it and sort of codifying the requirements between developers and neighborhoods, and the city and neighborhoods, and like community input. I understand the need to do that, but the RCO designations, at least so far in my experience, it seems to have sort of hurt a little bit more than it's helped, just in these divisions. Whereas if And I also want to say, and again, this is all pre my being on council, right? Our city planner, who has always been wonderful, I've worked with her specifically in Greenfield and Hazelwood, has always said, I make sure that these meetings happen with every group, not just the RCO, so don't worry, right? When these concerns like, oh no, are they going to meet with us because we're not the RCO? she has been excellent about making sure that everybody gets a meeting, right? Everybody gets to give their input. So that's, I guess I don't have any questions. I don't know, I guess thoughts on that.
Can I respond to?
Councilwoman, is it okay?
Yeah, I'd like to say that that's certainly been, a lot of what you shared has been my experience in the Hill District also. There are a few things that I think are particularly concerning in terms of the feedback we're getting from developers. So one of the challenges, I think, in the existing structure and policies and procedures of the ordinance and the policies and procedures that were developed by planning is that the developer can trigger the development activities meeting, right? So whenever the developer wants to have the meeting, all they have to do is notify the RCO that they want to have the meeting, irrespective of whether or not they've met the democratic and orderly standard of community input that is in the ordinance. So, for example, the RCOs, according to the ordinance, are supposed to establish a democratic and orderly process by which we collect community feedback. And so that's going to be different depending on the community. Our process was a roundtable of residents who scored against a community master plan that had been adopted by the community. We are still hoping that it can get adopted and codified at the city level. But our process is really based on that plan. For communities that don't have a plan, it may be a little more organic in how they're scoring them. But irrespective, there has to be a democratic and orderly process by which you receive community engagement. So if the developer finds that democratic and orderly process to be inconvenient to their timeline, then they will simply trigger their development activities meeting on you, right? And whether it is in an overlapping boundary where city planning has to hold it, or whether it is not an overlapping boundary, you are then forced as the RCO to hold that meeting within the time frame that you were notified by the developer. And so those are the kinds of things that I think really give an inordinate amount of power to developers when in fact it's supposed to be an opportunity for communities to ensure input into development. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anything else, Councilman? Councilman, do you have anything?
I don't disagree with anything that was said. I guess the only real question I would have is Director, Ms. Malines has already given some recommendations to us on changes to the ordinance. Have you and your team given consideration to how you would potentially change the ordinance to make it more equitable for the communities?
There have been conversations, and like you, I agree with a lot of what Ms. Malines did say, just as far as feedback that we've gotten from RCOs. I want to reserve any kind of recommendations for the survey. I mean, I think it is important for us to get the feedback from the surveys that we did put out. We obviously have talked about it, but we definitely want to make sure that we're putting out information that is based upon like real time responses and feedback from our RCOs and other residents who are concerned about this process.
What's the time frame for the survey?
That survey closes on Monday, March 13th. So there's another week and a half left of the survey.
Yes.
So I have a question about, well, first I want to say that I think that beyond the survey, there should be an opportunity to engage community. I know that a lot of people have not yet received the survey, whether they're RCOs or residents. I just don't know that there has been sufficient opportunity for people to provide their input. And the reason why I think that's important is because it's not a basic issue, right? It's a layered issue. In concept, what the ordinance attempts to achieve, which is increased equity and increased community voice in development at a time where Pittsburgh is experiencing, I would say, considerable market rate development in a city that is still working class, right? So when we miss that layer and those opportunities, we are talking about pretty considerable displacement of existing Pittsburgh residents. And I think that's a concern that we all have to be very thoughtful about when we're talking about eliminating opportunities for community to give input. So I think prior to kind of determining what the next step should be, there should be a clear and transparent and accessible process with existing RCOs as well as stakeholder groups that would influence that decision. And then I think irrespective of the RCO ordinance, we have to figure out a way to ensure that community input can be weighted to ensure outcomes that are equitable for neighborhoods and for our city. And I'm not hearing any conversation about how we're going to do that while we are simultaneously talking about the possible recommendation to eliminate the RCO ordinance. So I think there's a need to balance that before any action is taken.
No, again, I don't disagree with anything that was said. I think the challenge is there's not a one-size-fits-all is the challenge. And the aspirations of the ordinance are well-intended and they're very good goals. But to Councilman Strasburger's point, each neighborhood is different. And so while some neighborhoods may be okay without having RCOs and have a natural process, there are other neighborhoods who are trying to figure out how do they come to the table with development projects, where do they leverage their voice and their input. And so in order to do so, the RCO gives them that opportunity. The other challenge that we now have faced before us is you've now given a body a title and a purpose. It becomes somewhat hard to then simply strip that without still ensuring they have a way to actually function and still maintain that the responsibilities that they previously had. So I've heard both. There are absolutely those who have said to me, we'd be completely fine with doing away with the RCO ordinance because it doesn't work for various reasons. There are others who are like, no, wait a minute, this is my opportunity to be at the table. And so there may be tweaks such as not allowing a developer to simply say, I want a damn meeting in within, I think it's 30 days, I think, within 45. 35, thank you. Within 35 days, you must have that meeting scheduled because that's not really equitable. So we're somewhere in the middle, but I do agree with Marimba, Ms. Malines, that once the recommendations come out, we should have a fulsome conversation, both at this table as with the RCOs, wherever the best table for them is, to rethink, reshape either the legislation or a different approach, if that's what we choose to do.
Councilwoman Strasburger?
Thank you. I realized I had one more question before you asked your questions. Thank you. So this is, I don't mean to paper over any of the other discussions that we're having right now because they're incredibly important. But one sort of additional idea that I'd just like to bring to the table, or I guess question first and then additional idea. At what level does DCP have the ability to or currently support our RCOs or bring them together on a periodic basis? Do we currently do that?
As far as
like a monthly Zoom meeting, all RCOs are invited to a monthly Zoom meeting to provide updates, compare notes, anything like that. What I'm thinking about is what, not sure if it's currently being convened, but certainly during the lockdown portion of COVID, the different business organization, chambers of commerce, neighborhood, business neighborhood groups were pulled together and convened by Henry Horn Pyatt, and for the sake of sharing information. And I think the opportunity there is, I mean, perhaps not monthly, but perhaps quarterly, the opportunity there is to provide those RCOs or organizations that operate like that with, like, to allow them to skill up or to learn from other organizations that are doing things differently, maybe better, maybe just differently, and to, perhaps if there's really the opportunity to like bring in trainings on governance, on board structure, on, I am constantly getting city-centric webinar invitations to, City Lab or Next City or Governing Magazine or whatever it might be, to like how to engage in really vibrant community engagement, how to run a community engagement process, and those could all be opportunities for our RCO leaders to attend if they have the opportunity to know about them and to learn about them. So, you know, again, not the top priority here, but I wanted to put that out there as an idea going forward, regardless of whether we continue with the RCO as it currently stands or if it's simply the resident-driven organizations. But, and I get, DCP does not have the resources that we wish it did, but if there was a way to do that and to manage that and to at least allow for all the organizations to meet each other and have some cross-pollination, it might be helpful.
May I respond to that?
Absolutely.
So I think the spirit of a lot of the engagement is that it happens within communities. I think that there's a blurred line or a thin line between city planning initiating that engagement and communities themselves. And I think also that I think SJ pulled together the, you know, some history behind the program, CTAC, which was the, what does it stand for? Community Technical Assistance Center. I'm remembering that from years ago, was available to nonprofits to help them skill up. And so I think looking into the resources that are available to us in a nonprofit ecosystem would be a good start to getting the RCOs together. Because again, I think I mean, to Ms. Million's point, I think a lot of the community wants these conversations to stay in community and not be run by city planning department, other departments within the administration. So that'd be a one step towards seeing that come to fruition.
Yeah, so I think that in terms of the ordinance, one of the things that I realized pretty early on was that a lot of parties throughout the city who've never been involved with development or planning issues or conversations all of a sudden wanted to be RCOs, right? And I think that there should be some guardrails around what RCOs are and what the intent of their existence is about, which is to comment on development and planning issues. I think somehow it just got extrapolated to be kind of like this broad community voice, right? And people thought they were going to be left out of all types of conversations that didn't have to do with development and planning. And quite frankly, I think that a lot of organizations registered to be RCOs and have never had any experience or interest in development and planning, but knew that that's what they were either told or believed that that's what they needed to be heard. And I think that those are the kinds of misnomers that need to be addressed. In our case, again, in the Hill District, we have a roundtable of community organizations. We've invited in the Hill District all of the RCOs to sit around a roundtable and they would vote on the master plan, all development against the master plan. Now, all of the RCOs haven't accepted that invitation, but they've all been invited, right? And so there are those dynamics in communities that unfold. We've also had some meddling in our community from private developers relative to RCOs. And to me, I think that that flies in the face clearly of what the intent of and the spirit of the ordinance was. And I'd like to find some guardrails around what is the penalty that a developer has to pay for meddling in authentic community voice. And so those are a few other things that I think are worth discussing.
One last question. And this may be an observation as much of a question for you. Given that all our communities are not equal or are not the same, thus all RCOs are also not the same. I guess my question is, have you seen scenarios whereby more affluent communities can easily establish RCOs, can easily follow sort of the standards? There's a lot you're actually supposed to be doing to maintain your status as RCO. I've seen other communities that struggle with the ability to keep up and to the rules and regulations in the ordinance, and some of it is because, as Councilman Strasburg pointed out, they don't have the technical expertise. They're trying to play in a lane that is uncomfortable, and so I guess I'm asking: do you see the equity issue in terms of how we actually do or do not support the RCOs and how they're actually able to come to the table and engage in economic development equally across the board? and that may not have been the most succinct.
I mean, I think we make observations based upon responses to our inquiries around renewals of RCO status. And so without knowing what the capacity is or what resources are at that RCO, we can't fully tell you exactly what's happening because we don't ask those questions. But I think immediately we kind of assume that there's no resources to keep up a website, for example, or to even respond to questions that we even have. So, I mean, there are some resource constraints that communities are experiencing, and those communities tend to not fully participate in this process as they could if they did have the resources, meaning staff. Mm-hmm. Specifically staff, and people with technical assistance around just simply facilitating a meeting, for example, or putting together a website. And those are easily remedied if we just kind of coordinated and got some resources for groups to actually help those organizations do that. Some of the more well-resourced groups or groups that have a lot of volunteers, they tend to have a very coordinated way of working together, even if it's multiple RCOs in one geography. So not everything that you see around the geography means that there's some conflict or an ability to coordinate. There is, but it just depends on the geography. Obviously, it depends on the group and their capacity. So I would agree with you, but without actually, we have no facts to bear that out. But an assumption could be made. I'm not really good at making assumptions like that, but an assumption could be made around that.
One last question, because you mentioned the capacity, and we do know DCP is thin, right? Has there been any given consideration to creating a relationship whereby the RCO themselves can manage the DAM meetings, and or for those council offices that have the capacity, the council office managing the DAM meetings?
I'm managing my damn meetings. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, legislation literally kind of, I mean, that's what happens. So we really have to follow that. But yes, we would love for the communities themselves, the RCOs themselves, and even council to facilitate those meetings. Okay. We welcome that.
Right. I'll respond to that specifically. And this is what I was getting to earlier. Councilman, you know that, in the Hill District, the Hill CDC did facilitate the development activities meeting, but when there was an overlapping boundary created, then that began to fall on city planning, because the ordinance says that the city shall take over the process. And so I think that there's definitely something, that can be done in that regard. I also want to say, though, that, we are all struggling for resources, bandwidth, and capacity. None of us have enough time. None of us has enough money. None of us has all of the things that we need right now in order to thrive, it seems to me, in community and as a city. And so I want us to be thoughtful about how we are investing our resources, right? And as you all know, if you follow my career in community development, I'm big on investing in communities. The question is, how do we invest in those communities? And I think we should have some thoughtful conversation around whether the best way to invest in those communities is by providing technical assistance to 4 different resident groups who didn't really have to pass any threshold of anything other than to submit an application to city planning and get a letter from their council person, right? Is that how the city wants to utilize its resources, or private philanthropy wants to utilize its resources? I'm not saying that we shouldn't. I am saying that we should be thoughtful about that, because there are a lot of needs in our communities, from crime to development to small business support, where resources are needed on a daily basis. So let's make sure that we put that on the agenda of things to consider before we start seeding, because even if the technical capacity is great in the first 2-3 years, I can tell you that it's really, really hard to run a nonprofit long term. It's very, very difficult, and you've got to be personally vested and committed. And so do we want to go around seeding that activity without having a longer term goal? And is that the best way to use our resources? Thank you.
Else you want to say? Remember, we're going to recruit you to the West End. I don't know. My family was from the Hill too, and I moved to the West End. So just so you know.
Come on back to the Hill.
I don't recognize it anymore. But I was actually from Fifth and Robinson. But my mother was from Wally. My family lived on Wally.
Good to know.
Yeah, they tore the house down for the arena. But I do watch you and I do listen to you, and so I don't want to belabor this conversation. But I do think that we have to have. I was so happy Ricky Moody knew your number and could talk to you. So I do apologize. There was such a late notice to people about this. So you came, and we really need you to come. So I appreciate you coming last minute like this. But it was because the date got away from me and I didn't have a chance to really. So we are going to have a public process. We are actually planning some meetings for council members in the districts, in each of our districts. So I think that might be another opportunity to hear from the public about what they think. Because part of the problem, I think, is when we do things like the survey sounds great, but if we're doing a survey, there's a lot of people that don't go online. There are a lot of people that don't know to even look for the survey. It's getting the word out about the survey. So, I mean, maybe we could also hand them out at community meetings and other things, school events, school fun, different places. I think the city needs to do that across the board with all kinds. Because if you're going to take what a survey says as what we should be doing and the feedback for the public, then we really need to reach the real public. And so I think that that's part of the problem, is that they're not always engaged in some of the ways that we try to engage people. I think that council definitely wants to be at the table. I know for me, I had an issue with the RCOs. I didn't want to vote for them. You weren't here at the time. I didn't want to vote for them. I just thought, this is ridiculous. You're going to create a group of RCOs so that they can be the voice, and you're going to circumvent the council members who do know the communities, who were elected to represent the communities, for a group of people who feel like they're really not included in some of the stuff. You know, in my districts, some of them aren't fond of the CDCs and the RCOs, and I only signed 2 letters for my district, but honestly, I was hesitant to do that. It took me probably, almost a year for the first one, and the second one a little bit longer. And it's because I feel like they don't really know the community, and there's a lot of issues. So I think that when we go moving forward, I don't know why the public can't have access to all the information, period, is what I think. It's the public's information, and especially if we're doing some of this stuff. But I think if we're going to identify RCOs, they have to at least have some capacity to do some of the things that we need to have done. And I don't see that happening across the board. I mean, I have one in my district, and I love them to death. They're the nicest people. But they don't know the whole community. You know what I mean? But yet that's who they're serving. They're serving the entire West End. And I just don't see how it's going to be productive for our area. So for me, I'd rather have my own meetings. And when people say they're going to have a meeting, I'm like, I'll schedule the damn meeting. And I say, and I read it. So I'm ready to work on this with you and with others. I think it would be good to hear from the public a little bit more, and from the RCOs, because some of them put their blood, sweat, and tears and do a lot of stuff. Remember, do a lot for the communities that they serve, and that they speak for the community, and they deliver a lot of results for their neighborhoods. So I want to have them at the table, too. But I want to make sure that council is part of this equation. But I also want to bring in other people, that we don't typically hear from. Is there anything you two want to add to this at all? This conversation, you've been sitting here so patiently and quiet, listen to us talk about, and you've been working on it. So, is there anything you want to add?
Sure.
Do you mind, Director?
None at all.
Okay,
Please,
sorry.
they work on it
Sure.
in the day
So
in and day out.
we had posted the survey. We had intended for it to be live for 30 days. We immediately got some responses about having a printed survey, and so we were able to do that. We actually were able to share it with folks who wanted to fill it out by paper. That survey went to various user groups, so council members, commissioners, boards and commissioners, the RCOs themselves, residents, non-RCO neighborhood-based organizations, as well as developers and as well as city staffers. And so to date, we've had about 75 responses in the past 2 weeks. And so a lot of that is from residents themselves, or self-identified as residents themselves. And so we will definitely leave it open for longer as necessary.
Okay.
But we wanted to really be able to provide city council and other decision makers with some information that was from the community itself. And so we will be happy to share that with you all. We will also be happy to share the results of the survey as well as a fuller presentation on the history of the RCO program and some of the trends and things like that that we're seeing.
Do you see it, that it could be different in different districts or different neighborhoods? Like maybe somebody doesn't want an RCO, but maybe somebody desperately needs one. Do you see it being different across the board?
That's a really great question. That I do
Well,
not
it's the first time I heard that in 9 years.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think, and it's been said here at this table, some community groups and some neighborhood groups have a fuller capacity than others. And so it would be really interesting to see what it would look like to have a more tailored approach for per neighborhood. But again, that's something that would need to be supported not only by DCP, but fully supported with funding, with assistance, with education, with guidance, so that folks are really, can really participate meaningfully in any of these processes. And so I do appreciate the commentary that I've heard today from Ms. Lyons, as well as from each of you city council members. And so it's definitely something that we'll be able to take back.
Director, thank you
And
for those
thank
comments.
you,
Thank you.
Shonda. I just want to also add that I don't believe that capacity should define if you are an RCO. That's an unjust and unequitable way to look at the program. I think that there are groups that really probably do need to have neighbors that need an RCO. They don't have, organizations uplifted. They don't have, the capacity, but that doesn't mean that they should not become RCOs. So we've got to figure out how to make this program equitable for neighborhoods that really do need assistance but don't have it. So I'm not sure. I'm really trying to say that when we do rethink this, if we are rethinking this, capacity. If the neighborhood doesn't have capacity, it should not be a hard no. We have to figure out how to help them out in some way, shape, or form. And if that means that, we've got to work together to figure that out, we probably should.
So one of the things I do see happening across the city is I think developers and people with money do come into the neighborhoods and they do try to manipulate and do the thing because they have their interests, they have their developments that they want to see, and I understand that. But these are the neighborhoods of the people. They're not actually going to, the developers may never live in those neighborhoods. And so how do you make sure that a development happens, but yet the people have their voice in what they want to see happen? I mean, that's a balancing act, and I think it's really difficult. I think it's really difficult for council members in the mayor's office, but because you want to see the area grow and do well, but you also want the public to have what they want. One of the things I won't let them do in Ferrywood is they wanted to sell a swimming pool to a developer that wasn't going to let people from Ferrywood swim in the pool. I wouldn't let them do that, but it was like a battle. I'm thinking they were going to buy a pool that was closed in the community, sell it to a developer, and let his new development swim in it, but the people that lived there forever had it closed, they weren't going to be able to swim in it. So when I see what they can do when they come into a community, what developers can do, I don't know how you make sure that the community is respected and part of the process. At the same time making sure a development happens. And so I think it's worth having some conversation with some guidelines as well. And as Marimba Malines mentioned, that maybe some penalties or something if people cross over those lines or those boundaries.
Absolutely.
Something like that. Because I think it's really difficult. And I don't want you to answer the question. I know I'm putting you on the spot right now.
Can I make a comment to add on to that? I just want to emphasize how accurate your comments are. Re-emphasize how accurate your comments are about developers having far more capacity and ability to outmarket, right? In some cases, commission help from inside of the community or from people who know how to navigate these kinds of systems. Mm-hmm. It's extremely difficult for people who are not engaged in the process regularly to understand every single thing as it's happening. You've got in communities like the Hill District, and quite frankly, RCOs are, I would argue, most important communities most impactful in communities like the Hill District because there's more vacant land and opportunity to develop in neighborhoods like the Hill District, right? Mm-hmm. So it's important in other neighborhoods that are already well developed. But in the Hill District and in Homewood and in the West End in some cases, I mean, it's going to completely determine our future because there's so much vacancy. But I want to say that the development piece and, ensuring that there is integrity and fidelity of that process between developers and communities and city is very important. The number one thing that the city can do to ensure that that developers are respecting community voice is to enforce the power of that voice at the decision-making table. So if the developer goes to the Zoning Board of Adjustment, the Planning Commission, the Art Commission, the Historic Review Commission, and the commission is saying, the RCO showed up today, and according to the RCO, they are saying you did not do the full engagement. They are saying you circumvented the system. They are saying that you haven't responded to their inquiries. We're going to get a different level of engagement from developers at that stage. But as long as they believe that they can come before the commission, come before different bodies and get the approvals that they need, and that includes also going over to the Urban Redevelopment Authority or the Housing Authority of the City of Pittsburgh, if they think that they can get the approvals that they need without that, then that's what's going to happen. So I just want to encourage the commissions that are supposed to consider the RCO's voice to do that in a serious fashion and for there to be real consequences when the RCO ordinance is ignored.
Thank you. Anything else from members? We're going to get on to our, thank you all for being here. Any closing comments anybody wants to make?
I just want to thank you for this opportunity. I think we were long overdue.
It's the beginning of the conversation.
Right, we were long overdue to start this conversation. I just want to also lift up the DCP staff that's been holding this program up in the planning department.
I would hold them up too.
They've been doing an amazing job, and when we're getting capacity now in the division, but SJ and Sharonda and the rest of the team have done an amazing job. So I wanted to just make sure that we understood how difficult this has been at times. I think it's a rewarding experience to be able to help communities out, but it has been challenging at times. And so I wanted to just lift them up.
Anything else?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just want to thank you all, and we will have some additional conversations about this, but I do think something's going to come about some changes, either amendments, changing it totally, but there will be some conversations with council members. We'll work together on this. I think is this Councilman Wilson's committee or city planning? Okay.
Yes.
So we'll work with Councilman Wilson too on some of these changes. With that said, we need a 5-minute recess before we start our public hearing because the Cable Bureau needs 5 minutes in between. So I want to thank you all for being here. Can I have a motion to recess the meeting?
Motion to recess.
Or adjourn the meeting, I'm sorry.
Motion to adjourn.
In a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to Pittsburgh City Council's public hearing for Wednesday, March 1st, 2023, relative to the RCOs. Will the clerk please read the subject of the hearing?
Today's public hearing is on the status of registered community organizations.
Thank you. And we're joined today, for the record, by Councilman Lavelle, Councilwoman Strasburger, and Councilwoman Warwick. Excuse me. We'll now move on to testimony from registered speakers. Once you are called upon, please give your full name and neighborhood for the record. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes to address City Council. Can you read this? I'm coughing to death there.
Were you from the chair? Oh, okay. Sorry. So please keep in mind that this is an opportunity for the community to speak directly to Pittsburgh City Council about the issue at hand and a time for council to listen. Therefore, council will not be responding to individual comments. We will be listening to your reflections. Our first speaker is Abraxas Murmur. Yes. Is Abraxas Murmur with us? If not, I hope I'm not. Abraxas Murmur. Our next name is Andrea Bokowitz.
Hi. Hello. Thank you so much. My name is Andrea Boykowicz. I live in Central Oakland, and I'm the interim director at Oakland Planning and Development Corporation. I did not have prepared remarks today. I am speaking as a representative of a registered community organization. Had an RCO been charged with calling this hearing, it would have been a little bit clearer maybe what the subject matter to be discussed is, but I was really grateful to hear the tail end of the council's discussion earlier. We were recently provided with the survey that city planning has been circulating, requesting and inviting people's input and feedback in a very refreshingly broad and extremely open-ended way, and I was really grateful for the opportunity to provide feedback there. In our experience here in Oakland, the registered community organization designation has been a subject of some confusion occasionally, and maybe even occasionally some contention. However, in my interpretation of its best use, making sure that city planning is aware of the different capacities that neighborhood organizations have to communicate with their constituents and with the communities at large, the means by which they typically communicate, the channels and the populations that they target. I think that that is useful information for the city to have, and that use can be made of neighborhood organizations as vehicles and conduits for information flowing from the city to the community, as well as from the community back up to the city. And I think that this is the proper role for registered community organizations, and I would encourage city planning to look at ways to make sure that that is more the role and less of a kind of a validation, that there are certain people that are entitled to speak and certain people that are not, or people who are entitled to operate this way and certain that are not. It is mostly a means by which the city can acquaint itself with the capacities, the different capacities of the organizations that work in their communities citywide. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for coming down. And our next speaker, thank you, Councilman Lavelle, for taking over. I was choking to death there. Elena Zaitsoff. Is online?
I'm Elena Zaitsoff. I live in the Oak Cliff neighborhood of South Oakland. The Oak Cliff Community Organization, of which I am vice president, felt the need to become an RCO for two main reasons. The first is that we did not feel the other RCOs in Oakland represented us. The second is that we were not getting information about developments in a timely manner, and sometimes not at all, forcing us to scramble for hearings. These reasons are still valid and unlikely to change, so we want to thank the city for the RCO program, whose purpose, as stated in its legislation, is to obtain informed and inclusive participation from as many neighborhood stakeholders as possible and enabling organizations to participate in civic affairs. From a neighborhood viewpoint, the fact that there are 38 RCOs in Pittsburgh speaks to the need for them. I don't know what has prompted this hearing, but I do know from the residential parking permit program that it usually doesn't bode well for residents. It probably has to do with the legal requirement. Unlike Andrea, I felt the RCO survey questions and choices were slanted towards getting data to eliminate the program as it exists. There were places to respond in an open-ended manner, but what they were asking you to respond to may not be what you wanted to say. So you were able to use those boxes. If this program has growing pains, then it should be allowed to grow, not be diminished. Every RCO application has to provide a contact email address. I am a contact for the Oak Cliff Community Organization. Email notices about today's public hearing were not even sent to RCOs. Those most likely to be affected by changes in the RCO legislation. Perhaps that is why there is poor attendance today. Thank you.
Bernadette Mosley.
Hi, I'm Bernadette from Beachview, and this RCO thing is kind of new to me, and I learned a lot today. And yes, Beachview has been shunned by the current RCO. That current RCO is expired. I called someone before entering a few minutes ago. They have been ghost. They have not had a meeting since forever, quote unquote, not since September. And that was the meeting that we had to have because that RCO frequently left Anthony Coghill out. So the last time Anthony had a meeting with the RCO that I can remember, I was there, this Karen Abrams had attitude of, you mean to tell me that they're going to stop this Broadway Realm project for just 5 parking spaces? Yeah, because it's going to do more damage than that. And the people spoke. In any regard, it was started by Atlas, who picked up the pieces from Bernardo Katz, who also has gone ghost. His properties, they're not cleared of the ice. This current RCO asked for $2,000 investments. Their staff, the developer staff of Atlas, they were renting from him, and they were also his staff. It was just riddled with too many hands in the cookie jar, as Grandma would say it, and I don't think RCOs should be like that. Developers need to come to groups. They need to come to them and sell their spiel. It should not have URA members on an RCO. They should not all be in bed like that. I do suggest that Beachview area concerned citizens that has been there, gosh, since as old as my older kids are all in their 30s, they don't have anybody like that on there, and they just started meeting again. And nobody would ever think of not letting our council person come. There is total mistrust. They promise no gentrification. They come right on in, and guess what they do? They do gentrification, and then they fly off, and they're not available. There's sidewalks I can't even get past that are right behind my house, and it's owned by the developers that got all their stuff from the URA. The current RCO needs to go. It needs to go, period. They're useless. Amen.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Millie Sass. Online.
Hi, here I am.
Hi.
Millie Sass. I'm from the Oak Cliff neighborhood, and yeah, I have a few things to say here. First of all, I like the RCOs because it's given our community a voice. I do agree with the last speaker, though, that it seems odd to me that one of the RCOs in Oakland was really a business group, Oakbid. And so they have money, and they can run a whole lot different. They can hire attorneys, they can hire people, where I always thought an RCO was meant to be a registered community group. And by community, I thought that it was meant to be residents or people that own property, but not businesses, not so business oriented. And I will say what I see that the benefit of the RCO has been to Oak Cliff is that we're recognized now. It used to be we didn't get notices of anything, we had no voice, and we didn't get involved in the development activity meetings, the flow of information we just didn't have. But we got ourselves together, we went to training about becoming an RCO, we have our bylaws in place, we have the structure, we have our meetings defined, we became a nonprofit, we got our insurance, we did all of that. We jumped through all of those hoops. So it's extremely disappointing to me now, just even that whole mechanical business of becoming an RCO, even though I really felt that some, and then the RCO regions seemed to overlap as well, because all of a sudden OBID was taking over some of the area that we thought was part of our Oak Cliff territory. Let's see, but we jumped through the hoops because we wanted to be involved, and let's see. I don't understand how city planning would choose people to represent neighborhoods. Recently, we just went through the Oakland Plan. You know that, right? And the steering committee from the Oakland Plan, many of them were selected, some of them, a few of them were selected from RCOs, some from OPDC, some from our Oak Cliff one, I think some from North Oakland, and some from Shenley Farms and so forth. So how are you going to get representative community input, neighborhood resident input, if you don't have an organization that's got officers, bylaws, meetings? You're just going to have a lot of people running around screaming, and no real organization to it. Who hollers the loudest is going to get noticed. So what does that mean? That means that in my neighborhood, that the universities and hospitals are going to rule. We're not going to have any voice at all. So unless you can clearly define who represents the neighborhoods, then I don't see how you're ever going to get neighborhood input. And I don't.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Renee Wilson.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm City Council for holding this meeting. I'm quite pleased about what happened and what you're willing to look into. I just have some other suggestions to ask for suggestions, and one would be how we inform the community. Like, I found out about this meeting today. You know what I mean? And I know it's on the website. But everybody, with working and taking care of the children and things like that, you don't always find these things on the website. This means a lot to me. My name is Renee Wilson. I'm from the Hill District, where there's a lot of development going on the lower hill, which is going to affect us. And I think that it's important that we make sure that people know these things are going on. And one of it is, I still don't understand why Mellon is not going out to voters' registrations. Voters register people, we know where they live, we know they are part of the community, and they have an investment in them. Most of them, like there's a lot of people who own their houses and things like that. I also think that we should give people enough opportunity to make decisions in their lives, especially people who is low income. If you feel like you're not going to be able to stay here in 2 years, you need as much time as you can have to know that, so you can make that move more simple than it to be what it has been in the past with developments. A lot of things is going to change the hill, and a lot of people are not going to be able to afford to live on the hill. We know that just looking at the plans now, but the community doesn't know that. So by the time they know it, now it's a catastrophe. We've already had that in Pittsburgh with housing and things like that. All this development is pushing housing up. What it would cost to live in the area is pushing it up. The wages are not going up. So a lot of people cannot stay there because of the development. The other thing is the traffic. It's a mess when the Penguins play now. Getting home from work on the hill. Now we're going to put a music venue down there. So what is that going to be like? And these are things that need to be addressed to the community, before it happens, so they could be prepared for it instead of it being, wow, look at this. Yeah, I just moved back to the Hill. It's coming. I can't believe the traffic. You know what I mean? And I just think that we need to use the voters list, especially for surveys and things like that, to get out so we can actually hear the people's voices and know that we reach them. We do it for Election Day. We do it all the time. We send out mailers and everything like that. For something this big and this important, I think that should be utilized. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. And our next speaker is Sam Gibson.
Good evening, ladies and gents, council. How's everyone doing today?
Good, Sam. How are you?
Good. My name is Samuel Gibson, Gibson, and I represent Homewood. I want to talk about a few things real quick. I'm going to go real fast, so if you all can keep up with me, I hope so. I have there is a disattachment to that. I just want to say this organization, these young ladies that were sitting up here, the young lady by the name of Sabrina, 22 times I emailed her. 37 times we called her. The phone number don't work. The email is not happening. So there's a disattachment for us. I can't talk about any other city place, but for us, we represent Homewood North, Homewood East, Homewood South. We got Lincoln Lamar, East Hills. I didn't see it on the map. The other young lady didn't have it up here. There's a lot going on. You all talk about RCOs. Yes, I'm here because I want to represent the new RCO that's coming in. You all have a strategic team of people who is about 12 or 13 people. But here I have a packet that just came out of the city planning where all these the RCOs that is on there today receive violence prevention funds, so they have no time to deal with the RCO, what's going on. We have a lot of development happening in Homewood. Things are developing, being partially made and partially fixed, but not following through. So they leave that develop halfway done, so then we have people coming, burn it down, and now we have tragic in our area. I want to say something on the RCO. The RCO list, every RCO almost in the 15206 and 208 area code has expired. So who'd you all put y'all's mailing list out to? Because they can't be recognized as an RCO if their RCO has expired. My question to everybody is, how do I sign up? How do we get a collective group to sign up for the RCO? Because we want to do the job that you all have put out here. The blood is on the hands of everybody on city council. Everybody who represents city council, this blood is on you all's hands. If you guys continue to keep allowing this to happen, it's going to flow over into you all. I understand why you all want to take it back. I understand why city council want to take it back, but taking it back is wrong because the voice of the community cannot be heard. You guys got people prior to this meeting, prior to the meeting before, you all mentioned Operation Better Block. They are part of the RCO. And how dare you all give Operation Better Block any leeway in the community when they don't represent the community that they live in, that they work in, and that they represent. They do nothing for that community but pimp the work and the backs of the people who live in that community. It is absolutely horrible that this has happened. How do we get you all's help, city council? Because we need a new RCO, a new regime for people who of Homewood. This is completely out of control. And I'm here with my RCO application, if any of you all want to sign off on it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Sam. And Phyllis Garfor? Phyllis is not here. And Marimba Malines has already left. Are there any further speakers in the chambers wishing to address City Council? Are there any further speakers wishing to address it? Okay.
Hi, do I get 3 minutes or 1 minute?
3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay.
I'll give you 3.
Yeah,
We're feeling generous. We have nothing to do.
Yeah, so my name's Allison Keating. I live in Manchester. My thoughts on this go long past 3 minutes, so I'm gonna try to maybe make my couple best points I can think of. Like, y'all talked here for an hour about this at a post-agenda meeting, and not once did anyone mention why development activity meetings happen or they take place. They are triggered by when a project requires another meeting, a planning commission meeting, a zoning board meeting, a historical review commission meeting, and our commission. And so there wasn't really any discussion of what the problems actually, like it was like, oh, well, this is my problem with the RCO. Which, you know, like, yeah, like there are issues. I live in Manchester. We don't have an RCO, so we get no meetings about anything ever. You know, which I consider to be an inequality. Strip District has tons of development happening. Never gets a meeting about anything. They have meetings on their own that I guess, but I never hear about them. You know, but, you know, and then the other thing is the concept of the idea community. I go to Oakland for a lot of things. I don't live there. But, you know, I consider myself part of the Oakland community. You know, that's where my barber is. I frequent the library there. You know, it's a place that I love to go to all the time. But according to the community groups of Oakland, I'm not a community member because I don't live there. And, you know, so that doesn't really make any sense. So, you know, I think that the problems that people want addressed are legitimate. Many are legitimate. Some are invented. But, you know, like, you know, so like folks think that there's a lot of, you know, we're getting slammed with development, which is, you know, not statistically true. You know, I think if Pittsburgh actually had a lot of development happening, we'd be having a very different conversation right now. Anyway, so yeah, I think maybe, you know, teasing out like what is government for? You know, like what needs are we trying to meet with these meetings? You know, like do folks in Sugartop really need a meeting because somebody really need a development activities meeting because somebody wants to change their windows to you know, vinyl or whatever? You know, like is that something that's a good use of our city? You know, 500 hours in 1 year of city DCP staff time to facilitate meetings like those are the things I think that we should be looking at and not nitpicking, you know, one law.
Thank you very much for your comments. Is there anyone else in the audience wishing to address City Council? Anyone else in the audience wishing to address City Council? Seeing none, I'll just continue to say that we will continue working on getting some public input, having some meetings, and addressing the RCOs as they either currently are and amending with the way they operate, or coming up with a totally different process, or whatever the community, once we hear some feedback from the community. I can tell you, I personally think that there's, you know, a lot of issues in my district with RCOs. Councilwoman, do you have something you want to say?
Yeah, I did just, obviously this is a discussion to be continued, but to Allison's last point, you know, the idea that if you don't have an RCO, you're not getting meetings, that, you know, that's very important. And I think maybe just as we continue this conversation, it seems like all these rules that we're putting in place, you know, are about ensuring that the developers are engaging with the communities. So maybe, I mean, and not to say we should do away with RCOs or what, that's not what, I mean, that's, again, a discussion to be continued, but it seems like the rules need to be more focused on the developer's obligations when it comes to these meetings, and, you know, and maybe the flex we can give ourselves. See, it feels like we're almost restricting ourselves and giving the developers the flexibility, and it maybe should be switched, right, where we have the flexibility, whether it's the council office or city planning or a community organization, you know, whoever organizes the meeting, but that the strict rules should actually be placed. You know, the onus should be put on the developers to make sure that those meetings happen, and that people are engaged. And, you know, as someone mentioned sending out flyers, I mean, that would be great, right? It is very expensive to send out paper letters, but you know what? If you want to spend millions of dollars doing a project in a community, maybe you should be sending out letters to notify the community of the work. You know what I mean? About meetings and such. I don't know, just ideas, so.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Yeah.
Councilman Strasburg, do you have any closing remarks? Councilman? No? And so I'll just say that, again, you know, in some districts they work, in some districts they don't, but I think that for me, And the thing I always tell people is whenever you hear that we're doing something, a new process, and we're having the community engage in a process, and the community's going to lead something, they're really taking away the voice of the public, not giving it to the public, because it's the council people that are elected to represent the public, and we're going to make sure we open our meetings to everyone. We're going to do the best we can to get information out. And I just want to make sure people understand that we really want to hear what's best for the public. Marima, did you want to speak for 3 minutes? Okay, thank you. Okay. I just had you listed and didn't know you were still here. So with that said, I think we're going to have to learn from people that do know this world and do work in this arena, but also our public. I think Sam brings a lot of good, comments to our attention, and I think that there's just something we just have to do better at. And it's always difficult for us to try to figure out public process, because no matter what we do, we're going to miss somebody, and somebody's going to say we didn't do it the right way. So I think it will have some more conversations, and if public has any feedback they'd like to provide to City Council, can they email the clerk's office at City Clerk's Office at pittsburghpa.gov. If you can email to them, to the clerk's office, they'll send it to all members, and we'll use that as some way to start drafting whatever process, and combined with the surveys, whatever we decide to do. With that said, can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting in a second? All in favor? Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everyone.